In 1967, I was a 20-year-old student at the United States Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point, New York. And in 1967, I was standing right on this road here, hitchhiking all the way to Montreal, Canada, to Expo 67, the World's Fair on the Future. But I was going to see one person in particular. It was the geodesic dome, the U.S. Pavilion in 1967, designed by a man named Dr. R. Buckminster Fuller. It was a different time, and that's what it must have looked like back in 1967, hitchhiking to Montreal, Canada, to see the man who could see the future. Fuller was a futurist, and he was one of the first persons that systematically defined how you and I can see the future. So that really intrigued me, because if I could see the future, I could see the future of stock markets, bond markets, real estate markets, and all that. And so I had a very small reason to want to be a futurist. It's all about greed to make money. So then in 1981, I had the opportunity to study with Dr. Fuller up in Kirkwood, California, which is near Lake Tahoe. And I spent a week with him up there. And I realized he wasn't looking at the future of the stock market. He was looking at the future of humanity. But the people running our economy, running the world, running our banks, running our politics, have us on a collision course with disaster. So I went, and once I could see the future, I knew I had to make changes. I was in rock and roll. I had bands like Van Halen, Boy George, Duran Duran, The Police. And I was having fun, man. It was sex, drugs, rock and roll. I was in my 30s. I thought it was a hot life, great life. Then I met Fuller, and then I changed. There's more to my life than just making money and selling hats, wallets, bags, t-shirts, and sex, drugs, rock and roll. And so after 1981, I started studying with him more earnestly. I studied his books more, especially his book, Critical Path. I started applying what Fuller's teaching, how to predict the future, to the markets, because that's my interest. That's my rich dad and Bucky Fuller, that's where they come in line. They say the same thing. The markets are manipulated. In 1969, I graduated from Kings Point and joined the U.S. Marine Corps and was selected for pilot training in Pensacola, Florida. In 1972, I was flying helicopter gunships in Vietnam. Also in 1972, my rich dad sent me a letter saying that President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard in 1971. He said, "Be careful, the world was about to change." So in 1971 was when our wealth began to be stolen. Since 1981, I had the privilege and the good fortune to study with Dr. Fuller 3 times. And then when he passed away on July 1st, 1983, I really felt a complete loss, yet a responsibility to pass on the knowledge and wisdom he had taught me in my class. So after 1983, I began to make predictions. And, making predictions is very risky because you sound like an idiot. And in many ways, I sounded like Chicken Little saying, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And if you look at what's happening in the world economy today, for millions of people, the sky is falling. So in 2002, I published this book here called Rich Dad's Prophecy. Again, it was 2002, And what this book predicted was the giant crash coming in 2016. So 14 years ahead of schedule, I was making this prediction. But I also made one intermediate prediction behind that, was that there would be a secondary crash before the giant crash of 2016. So this is me on CNN with Wolf Blitzer, looking like a complete idiot, making a prediction on the coming crash.
If people start pulling out of the markets in their 50s, in their early 60s, and not having that sort of exposure, we are never going to get to a point where our money lasts as long as we need it to. We need to be participants in this system into our 70s and into our 80s, and then we need a plan for withdrawing those assets, just like we needed a plan for putting those assets in.
Yes, and you're putting those assets into those investment bankers that are in financial trouble today. And all I'm saying is, aren't these guys supposed to be the smartest guys on earth? And shouldn't we be careful who we take financial advice from, including the four of us on this panel?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of bad advice
But Robert,
out there.
you're really that worried about Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers?
Yes. I'm afraid the Federal Reserve will eventually or come close to bailing them out. That's what I'm concerned about. And that young lady who says the taxpayers are not in trouble, who's going to pay for that bailout again is the taxpayer.
Lehman Brothers says it plans to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
The collapse of Lehman Brothers.
Lehman Brothers collapsed.
Hundreds of bailed out banks are still struggling to repay taxpayers.
Way back in 1997, I published this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I said three things that got me in a lot of trouble. One was that the rich don't work for money. Number two is your house is not an asset. And number three, savers would be losers. So that was in 1997. And look at what happened in 2007. The real estate market crashed. The government started printing money called quantitative easing, and savers became losers.
It's no secret that the California housing bubble has popped with hardships spread wide. Real estate expert Robert Kiyosaki predicted all of this would happen back in 2005, but most people didn't listen.
It's the biggest financial bubble in the history of the world.
Hoping this wasn't inevitable, but we have had a big jump in foreclosure filings. Let me tell you a little about this. There are 650,000 homes in the United States in foreclosure right now.
U.S. foreclosure activity jumped 81% in 2008. With
10 million people lost their homes to foreclosure and were forced out onto the streets.
And to this day, millions of people are still underwater. They owe more on their house than their house is worth.
You want to know what real estate's going to do? Look at jobs.
Right.
We still have a bad job situation, so
Right.
it's still a bad real estate situation.
Right. Real estate is only as valuable as there's jobs.
What made you write Conspiracy of the Rich?
It goes back to why don't we have financial education in our schools?
Question: was the financial crisis a creation of a wicked conspiracy? A new online book, Conspiracy of the Rich, The 8 New Rules of Money, exposes what author Robert Kiyosaki says is a twisted tale of how the rich control the world economy through, you name it, the Fed, Wall Street, your schools, and the government that supports these entities. Robert Kiyosaki is the author of the best-selling Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. His first book in the series has held a top spot on the New York Times bestseller list for 6 years running. And he joins us on the program today. Hello, Robert. What is this conspiracy theory? You mean it's a few people at the top handling all of us like puppets on a string? Say it isn't so.
Well, I wish it wasn't so, but I've been a student of this crisis since around 1983, and I could see it coming back in 1983. People that are following the old rules, such as work hard, save money, get out of debt, live below your means, and invest in a well-diversified portfolio of mutual funds, you're getting wiped out. So all coins have three sides. There is no such thing as a one-sided coin. See, all coins have heads on one side and tails on the other side, and the third side is the edge. So in real life, there'll always be people who say you're right, other people who say you're wrong. There's other people who are saying that we should be Republican or you can be a Democrat. See, the intelligent thing to do is stand on the edge. You see, intelligence is found on the edge. The moment you take a side, you say one side is right and the other side is wrong, you become an idiot. And in today's world, we have the battle between the capitalists and the socialists. I say both sides are right, but the most important thing to do is which side is best for you. So stand on the edge, be intelligent, and look at heads and tails. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. F. Scott Fitzgerald.
On July 1st, 1983, I was driving down the highway in Honolulu, Hawaii, and it came over the radio, futurist and genius Buckminster Fuller passed away today. And this overwhelming sense of, I had to pull over to the side of the road, all these cars whizzing by, and just cry.
I've mentioned the WinStar project, and one of the gentlemen who's involved in the WinStar project is named Buckminster Fuller. He's a very, very dear friend of mine. I consider the genius of our times. And this is a song that I wrote for Bucky that's part of the new album that I'm out in L.A. recording. I suppose that there are those who'll say he had it easy, had it made in fact before.
Because he was what they call the grandfather of the future. John Denver talked to him. He was our hope, that he was going to bring about a better world. And so when he died, the question goes, well, who's going to replace him? And thank God I always remember what Fuller said. He says, in 1927, when he was a complete screw-up, he lost his businesses and all this, he says, what can I do? I'm just a little guy. So as I'm sitting on the side of the road, just mourning the loss of what I thought was the man who was going to lead us out of this mess we're in, I realized he was not there anymore. Then I had to ask myself, what can I do? I'm just a little guy. And in '84, I sold my businesses, quit my job, met this beautiful woman named Kim. My friend Blair Singh and I, now Rich Dad Advisors, we all held hands and we took a leap of faith. Went in and said, I don't know what we can do, but we have to do something. And we were broke for years. But we just kept teaching and talking to people what Fuller says and teaching the same things my rich dad taught me of how you never need a paycheck again and how you can find financial freedom versus job security.
That's how strong his love for you and me. A friend to all the universe, grandfather of the future, and everything that I would like to be.
In 1983, after Fuller passed away, and I read his book, Grunch of Giants, Grunch standing for Gross Universal Cash Heist, I understood what both men were saying. Our wealth is being stolen via our money system.
Man can do is change the world and make it new again. Don't you see what one man can do?
So the thing I'm upset about is our school system doesn't teach us anything about money and how the ultra-rich are manipulating the system via printing money. They're ripping us off for our money system. So that's why, as I said, there's three sides to a coin. You have to decide which side you're on. You want to be on the poor and middle class side? Knock yourself out, have a good time. Work hard, pay taxes, and lose money. I want it to be on this side of the coin. The riskier side is the poor and middle class, because the state of the economy today, they're going to keep printing. We cannot survive this thing. The central banks will just keep printing money. And that's good for me because I'm going to make more money, but every time you print money, the poor and middle class get poorer. So that's why I wrote Second Chance. You have to decide where you want to be, I made my decision years ago. I don't want to be on the poor and middle class side. I want to be on the rich side. But I also found the social responsibility to let everybody know the whole picture.
Fuller was not only a futurist, he was a scientist, a mathematician, some call an architect. He was asked to leave Harvard not once, but twice, so he never really finished school. He was a genius, but he was hard to define simply because he was a genius at so many different subjects. In 1983, after reading his book, Grunch of Giants, posthumously, after he had passed away, I was surprised because Grunch of Giants was not about math, science, it was about the economy. It was about the future of the economy. And that's when I realized Bucky Fuller and my rich dad, who was my best friend's father, had been saying the same things for years. After reading Grunch of Giants, which stands for Gross Universal Cash Heist, how we're being ripped off by the very thing we work for, money, I began doing my own research on what both men had been saying. See, up to then, I was a proverbial C- student. I only studied just to take a test. I only studied what I was told to study. I take the test and forget about it. But after reading Grunch of Giants and hearing what Bucky said about the future and the economy and what my rich dad had been telling me for years, I became a student for the very first time. I went all the way back, not just taking their word for it, but finding out my own answers. I wrote Second Chance because there's a lot of confusion about this global economic crisis. You know, one side of the coin, especially the politicians, say, hey, don't worry, everything's fine, the economy's coming back. On the other side of the coin, there's people who say, we're on the eve of destruction. You know, buy guns, store food, buy gold, and go into hiding. And on one side of the coin, the socialists say, we need more entitlement programs. We need to take care of people. And capitalists say, if we keep giving people money, we're all going to go broke. And today, finally, everybody knows America is deeply in debt. We all know the U.S. is in debt, and this is the chart of the national debt of the United States, somewhere over 17 trillion. And for some people, that's scary, but what's coming up next, to me, is terrifying. We're out of money, and all this does is scare people and confuse people. People do not know what to do. And so that's why I wrote Second Chance. I wrote Second Chance as simply as possible. You know that principle, KISS? Keep it super simple. So Second Chance is written very, very simply. The following are examples of some of the charts you'll find in Second Chance. Remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this first graph is a picture of the purchasing power of the US dollar. You know, people say there's inflation. There really isn't inflation. What's really happening is the purchasing power of the dollar is going down. This makes life harder and harder on those who work for money. So in other words, the US dollar is worth less and less and less. The more the government prints money, the more worthless the US dollar becomes. The government says they won the war on poverty. Well, this chart says differently. Because the U.S. is printing money, what you find out is harder and harder for the poor and lower middle class to earn what's called a living wage. In other words, they can't afford to live. They can't afford a house, they can't afford food, they can't afford transportation. And what this chart shows here is the increased use of food stamps. So while our government says poverty is going down, the reality is that use of food stamps is going up. This means the average American cannot afford to live. For this next chart here, you'll see that the middle class in America is not growing. What this chart shows you is the middle class is shrinking. So to keep up with these global changes, millions, young as well as old, are going back to school for retraining, hoping to find that high-paying job. Unfortunately, these two charts tell a different story. The first chart here is you see the rising cost of a college education. And as you know, millions of people leave school, both young and old, saddled for a lifetime with student loan debt, the worst possible debt of all. Student loan debt is worse than a mortgage, credit card debt, or a car loan. Simply says student loan debt is debt for life. That is inhumane. And this chart really concerns me. This is the chart on Social Security. If you look at this chart, you notice just around 2012, the Social Security Trust Fund goes bankrupt. It starts operating in the red. Simultaneously, in 2012, 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day, just as the fund goes broke. How are we going to pay for this? You know, what's going to happen to these old guys? What's going to happen to my generation, the baby boomers? Will the baby boomers, the most affluent generation in history, soon become the baby busters? I'm concerned about my own generation. Worst of all, how are we going to pay for these old guys like me? You know, Medicare goes up, expenses go up. You know, life doesn't get cheaper when you get old. You know, it is estimated that Social Security, Medicare, and other entitlement programs is an off-balance sheet debt of $100 trillion to $250 trillion. Most people do not know how big that debt is. How are we going to pay for this? Print more money? Who is going to pay for this? You? Your kids? Your kids' grandkids? Who is going to pay for this? Are we just going to print more money? And this leads to the next thing that really concerns me. These next two charts shows you what happens when a country prints too much money. Again, as Bucky taught me, to see the future, look at the past. And what you see here is a chart of the German Weimar government between the years 1918 and 1923. The German government, to pay its bills, began printing and printing and printing and printing. So the German economy looked good because the economy was growing with all this printed money. But what happened was it eventually collapsed after 1923. What happened was this: if you were a millionaire in Germany prior to 1918, by 1923 you were a pauper. I'm afraid that's what's going to happen to millions across the world if the United States keeps printing money. So here's a chart of the United States today. It's called quantitative easing. You know, it just keeps going up. The reason they call it quantitative easing, that's simply government speak, government jargon, a way of keeping us confused. Quantitative easing simply means printing money. Notice the similarity between Germany between 1918 and 1923 and the United States today. And so here we are in 2015, and let me tell you, it's spooky. It's a long way down. And when I look back, you know, at the giant crash of 1929, it's very small. So the question I ask you, which way is the economy going? Hopefully my rich dad and Bucky Fuller are wrong, that the stock market will keep going up. Looking for a savior, the German people elected Adolf Hitler Chancellor of all Germany in 1933. After taking control of Germany, Hitler is quoted as saying, "What luck for the rulers when men do not think." Same thing is going on in America today. That's why there's no financial education or school, and that's why our government can get away with what it's doing. I see similarities between then and now. Do you? As I said in part one, in 1971, President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, and the dollar became debt, and the U.S. could now print money.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
The problem is our education system never changed after 1971.
You see what low grade you made on your weekly mathematics test? More than half of you failed. Most of those who passed just got by. Nobody had 100%.
And now we have this gap between the rich and everybody else. And this is dangerous. The gap between the rich, poor, and middle class is too wide. And for the first time, the American dream is disappearing. Instead of the American dream where everybody become rich, many people in America and throughout the world are angry at the rich. You know, today some politicians are saying, look at the gap between CEO pay and employee pay. Well, that is the American dream, to get rich. Do you get angry at the Kardashians for making $1 million? Do you get angry at sports stars for making $1 million? Do you get angry at rock stars for becoming rich? Look, if you're going to get angry at somebody, get angry at our school system. Look, this is not an economic crisis.